Hello, everyone. I'm Daz, and welcome to American Civil War and UK History podcast. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcast from. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit that subscribe button and give us a big thumbs up. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, check out our website where you'll find blog posts, podcasts, and links to all of our social media pages. The link is available in the podcast description. And joining me today, I'm very pleased to say, is director and legend Ron Maxwell. Welcome, Ron.
Great to be with you, Darren.
Thank you. And again, today we are going to be discussing, ladies and gentlemen, none other than Gettysburg and, of course, Gods and Generals as well, which was released. So Gettysburg was released in 1993, Gods and Generals 2003. But would you like to start by telling us a little bit about you and how you became interested or became involved, sorry, in the movie industry?
Ooh, golly, that's taken me back a few years. So I was one of those precocious kids who was writing and directing and building the scenery and selling the tickets when I was a kid. So I'm sure we all know these obnoxious brats who put on performances in their parents' garages and living rooms and attics and church basements, wherever. Well, I was one of those guys. And soon after I could read, very soon after I could read, I was writing. And I was writing short stories and plays. And so by the time I was in junior high school, that's what, 11, 12 years old, I was already writing complete plays. And when I was 14-ish, I was very much influenced by a BBC series called An Age of Kings, which took all of Shakespeare's histories and put them in chronological order, not the order in which he wrote them, but the historical order. It's available now. You can get it. It was done in black and white broadcast, but I was riveted. And it made such a lifelong impression on me as an introduction to Shakespeare, but also his histories. And I started mimicking blank verse and iambic pentameter and wrote two plays, which I actually produced. One in the ninth grade and the other one in the 10th grade. First was Charles the First, and the second was Henry the Third. Two that Shakespeare had missed. So, well, he wasn't alive when Charles the First was a king. Anyway, that started me. So I was deeply into theater, and I became a theater major at New York University. My undergraduate days, I was always on stage, always in rehearsal. My junior year, I actually played Hamlet before I acquired this lisp, which I acquired after some dental work in my 30s, go figure. But anyway, I played Hamlet in my junior year at NYU, which was one of the great experiences of my life. And then I went to graduate school. I went to graduate school at New York University's Institute of Film and Television. So, with the arrogance of youth, I thought by the time I was 20-ish that I knew everything I had to know about theater. And so I wanted to learn how to make movies. And so instead of going to the theater program at the School of the Arts, I went to the filmmaking program. And little did I know it was a divergent path for me because I've hardly ever been on the stage ever again. I sometimes miss it. But in any case, that early work in the theater gave me a great sympathy and understanding for what an actor does, the process of creating a role. And it's led me to be very sympathetic and understanding of what an actor does. And it's one of the things I most enjoy about filmmaking is working with actors, uh, helping to birth those performances. So that started me in graduate school at the Institute of Film and Television in New York. And looking back on it, I was among the first formally educated filmmakers before 1970, which was the year I graduated in the master's program. Uh, there were film studies courses and some occasional film production courses, but you couldn't get a degree in filmmaking. So before the late 60s, the way you learned how to make movies was to be apprenticed, the old-fashioned way, to go on a movie set, become someone's assistant, become an apprentice. So I was in that transitional generation that was formally educated. And now, as we know, there are really excellent film schools the world over. Uh, and that basically started me on my filmmaking journey.
Excellent, thank you. And you got to make you made some good movies in the early days, didn't you? And you got to work with people like Dennis Quaid and Mark Hamill, didn't you? In is it the 81 movie that you the night the lights went out in Georgia? So that's really cool, you know. You've literally not that long started, and you're working with these fantastic actors.
Yeah, the night the lights went out in Georgia was my second Hollywood picture. Uh, Before that, I had started in 1974 working at WNET New York, which was the flagship PBS station back in the day. And I worked for an extraordinary gentleman by the name of Jack Venza, who just left us a year or so ago, not more than a year or two ago. He was well into his 90s, an extraordinary man, a great mentor to me. Uh, and it was at NET 13 that I started working as an associate producer, then as a producer, and we had a series called Theater in America, where we recorded the productions that were being done in America's National Theater. And because it's such a vast continental country, we were doing productions from the ACT in San Francisco, the Long Wharf in Connecticut, the Circle Rep in New York, the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. And also that generation of young actors were all involved. So Meryl Streep, Glenn Close, many others back in the day. And you know, when you're that young and energetic, we were just knocking out tons of programming and working around the clock. I was married very young, had children at a young age. Again, I think I was the end of that generation that married young and had children young. So it was challenging to be a young father and to work on those long hours, but you have the energy to do it. And after 4 years at NET, where I then co-directed Sea Marks with Steve Robman. And that was from a production at the uh, Manhattan Theater Company. It was is the play by Gardner McKay called Sea Marks, and we opened it up and took it from the stage. It's a two-character play on a stage done with a table and chairs, and we opened it up and we filmed it in Ireland with George Hearn and Veronica Castang. And that provided me with one of the great experiences of my life. My very first trip to Ireland, we were filming in Dublin at Ardmore Studios, and the West Coast, we were filming in Achill Island in January. We couldn't find a house with central heating back in the day. It was all turf fires and thatched roofs. I'm so glad I got to see the old Ireland and to meet some of the people who were living in this pre-European world. And I don't say that to sound overly romantic. This was really the quality of life. And I'm so glad I got to see it and to live in it for a while we made Sea Marks. But anyway, it started for me my lifelong appreciation of Celtic culture and the Irish people and Ireland. And that's when I met Paddy Maloney of the Chieftains, who scored my film Sea Marks. And that became a lifelong friendship. Paddy and I worked again on Gods and Generals, which we filmed in 2002. And if you listen, the Uilleann pipes and the tin whistle that's played in that movie score, the score by John Frizzell, that's Paddy Maloney playing those instruments. My second picture at WNET 13 was Verna USO Girl, adapted from a short story by Paula Gallico. And that was adapted from the story by Albert Inarado. That starred Sissy Spacek. It was Bill Hurt's first film right out of the Juilliard acting program. The great Howard Da Silva and Sally Kellerman, whom everyone remembers from MASH. It was a dream cast. We filmed it in what was then West Germany. Remember, this is 1977, the fall of 77. Germany didn't become unified till after the Berlin Wall fell. I think in 91 or 92, Germany became unified. So we were in West Germany. filming at military posts because it was a World War II era picture. And that picture was very well received. It had what we call rave reviews, and that's what got me invited to Hollywood with offers to direct my first Hollywood features. The first one I did, as we know, was Little Darlings with Christy McNichol, Matt Dillon, Armand Asante, and Tatum O'Neal. Another wonderful, wonderful experience, and that film was a big hit. And then it was after that that I was offered the picture of The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, which was, again, a terrific movie. And that explored the relationship between a brother and a sister, which is rarely explored on film, with really, really magnificent performances from both Dennis Quaid and Christy McNichol. I believe it was Dennis's first leading role. He had been in movies before. He was in The Long Riders with his brother. But to best of my knowledge, it was his first leading role, and he was just terrific to work with, and he delivered a great performance. So that takes us right up to 1982.
Nice. Thank you, Ron. Excellent. Okay, so I've got to ask, what first drew you to the American Civil War as a subject for film? Is that something that you'd had in the back of your mind for quite some time?
Actually, Darren, no. I was led to the Civil War and led to the subject matter by Michael Shara's extraordinary novel, The Killer Angels. Now, of course, I had a background in American history, thanks to my dad. My dad was a World War II veteran. He was in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Your fellow Brits will know he was there fighting side by side with the Brits in World War II. He was in North Africa. He was in Sicily and Italy. And I have a great photograph of him smoking a cigarette in his uniform in front of the Vatican the week that Rome was declared an open city, which was the same week, June of 1944, of the Normandy invasions. Well, obviously, he lived to tell the tale. I had a great father, great mother, too. I'm blessed to have great parents, as we know, is one of the great blessings of life. And I certainly was blessed. And my mother was a war bride. So my father and mother met during the war. She was in France, in occupied France, literally liberated by the U.S. Army and by my father. They were married after the war. And we all came, me as an infant, we all came in the late 40s back to the United States, where I grew up and I've lived all my life. But it was my father who took my younger brother and I to historical sites. My father was a great reader of history, of biography, of literature, of poetry. He learned his trade while he was in the U.S. Army Air Corps, which was radio and communications, and that's how he made his living. But his great passion was also always history and literature, and I guess I inherited that from both my parents, because my mother, too, was a great reader, in her case, of French literature. And so when we were kids, quite young, my father took my younger brother and I up to the historical sites that were in our part of the world. We grew up in New Jersey, so that was colonial history, which for Americans is ancient history. For you Brits, it's the day before yesterday.
Yeah, we don't really like talking about it. It's a sore subject. I'm joking.
So we would visit the sites of the French and Indian War. And if the British audience that will see this, those who have yet to visit America, it's a beautiful part of the country. It's upstate New York, lower Canada, where where the war was mostly fought, the French and Indian War, or as the Europeans called it, the 7 Years' War. And there are still very beautifully maintained spots, which we visited during my youth. Fort William Henry, which was a wooden fort built at the bottom of Lake Champlain, which was rebuilt in the 1950s and 60s. And then at the north of Lake George, at the south of Lake Champlain, is Fort Ticonderoga, which is the original stone fort built by the French as Fort Carillon. A magnificent site. I mean, you go there, and luckily there's been almost no development around it. So it's really stepping back in time. So my background growing up was in colonial history, the American Revolution, the French and Indian War. I'd never visited a Civil War site before reading Michael Shara's novel, which obviously made a deep impression on me. And before I was finished reading it, I read it on the train. I was afraid to fly in those days. I read it on the train from New York to Los Angeles. And before I arrived, because it's a 3-day trip, I'd finished the novel. And the first thing I did when I got off the train in 1978 was to call my agent and said, let's try to find out how we can option this book. Because I knew right then and there I wanted to make a movie from the Killer Angels.
Yeah. And so did you actually have the chance to meet Michael Shara?
Well, yes, we tracked down where he was. He was living in northern Florida at the time, and he was a professor at the time. And his subject was English literature. And I got in touch with him, and he agreed to come up and see me. But at that time, I hadn't made my Hollywood pictures yet. I'd made the ones I referred to earlier at PBS, and the second of the two, Verna USO Girl, got me an Emmy nomination. So I wasn't a total cipher, but I have not yet made Hollywood movies. So, but he had an open mind, open enough to fly up to New York to meet with me, and we had a couple of great meetings. We met initially, and then we met again. And he decided to trust me with the option. So we structured a deal, and I sent him the first check, and I started optioning. And once I had the option, I started working on the screenplay, which took me a couple of years actually to write, because in the intervening time, I started working on my Hollywood pictures, and I was trying to do the writing in between what we call in the business the go pictures that I was slated to do. The first being Little Darlings. But sometime in I want to say 1980, perhaps 81, in that time frame, I had a screenplay, and I wanted to hear it. And so my good friend Richard Jordan, who provided me a lot of excellent feedback on the screenplay. We organized a reading backstage at the Mark Taper Forum on a dark night. And between Richard and I, we invited 15 to 20 actors, wonderful actors like Peter Donat, Dana Elcar, and others. And we met around 6 p.m.-ish, and we read through the whole screenplay, and we finished by before midnight. With a break for sandwiches in between. And at the end of the reading, of course, I was taking notes the whole time, what sounds right, what needed to be reworked. But at the end of the reading, the assembled cast, after the scene where the Chamberlain brothers embrace, there was a pause, and they all broke out into a spontaneous, sustained applause. And it was I heard that as an endorsement that I was going to make the movie. I kind of knew that night after that reading that I had no idea at that point, 1980, it would take me another 12 years to make the movie, and another 13 or 14 before it would be released. But it gave me the conviction that night that I would see it through.
Yeah. How hard is it, Ron, to adapt a book to a screenplay? Is it difficult?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because there's no getting around the time and the concentration and the work you have to put into it. But it's I don't see it. I don't feel it as difficult because it's something I really enjoy. So, like any kind of work, if you enjoy what you're doing, if you're a sculptor, if you make pottery, I mean, whatever you're doing, if you enjoy the effort in the moment seems effortless. I'm sure everyone can understand what I'm talking about. If you're doing something you don't enjoy doing, then it's drudgery. It feels like drudgery to us, and every second seems like an eternity, even if you're being well paid. But so script writing for me I really enjoy the process, whether it's an original screenplay from whole cloth or an adaptation of an existing piece of literature. And I think in the case of the adaptation, which I've done a number of times now, of course, you're starting out with someone else's creation. And in the case of Michael Shara, well, I was attracted to his book because of his writing. There are, and I've since found out because I've done a lot of research. I did a lot of research before writing the screenplay. I didn't want to start the screenplay just having read Michael's book because I realized the Battle of Gettysburg has been studied. It's been written about. So in that process, I started reading about the Battle of Gettysburg by historians. And I met Civil War historians, among them Gabor Borit, who was then the head of the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. And we then became great friends and are still great friends. So he was a guide for me because any historical subject, you imagine if you were going to write a screenplay about D-Day. Well, there's a library full of books on D-Day. So where do you start? And so you need the guidance of the historians. And so Gabor Borit was a wonderful guide, and he could say, read this, read that. You don't need to read this. And I would start that process. So again, while I was working on the screenplay, I was reading all the time about the Battle of Gettysburg. Which would fill in the blanks. Now, as we know, as anyone who's read the book knows, and as anyone who's seen the movie knows, the book, the novel, and the movie doesn't pretend to be the entire Battle of Gettysburg. The entire Battle of Gettysburg is more than what you see in the book or the novel or the movie. Other campaigns, other things going on. Michael Shara saw the battle through his eyes by examining principally Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain on the Yankee side, with reference to others like Hancock, briefly Meade, other Federals, and on the first day, General Buford, certainly. And on the Confederate side, principally with Robert E. Lee, General Longstreet, to a lesser degree, Pickett, Kemper, Armistead, Hood. And so he follows these characters through their interactions. Now, once I had the option and I started working on the screenplay, having never been to the battlefield, I thought, well, it's important for me to go to the battlefield. I shouldn't even think of writing the screenplay until I've walked the battlefield. So Michael Shara and I met. He flew up. He had a private plane. He had a two-seater, I think it was Piper Cub. He flew it up from northern Florida, and he landed at the grass strip at Gettysburg, or Adams County. It's outside of Gettysburg. And I drove down from New York City, and we met, and we arrived on an evening because Michael wanted to have 3 full days to walk through the battle as he told it in the novel. So my Civil War guide for the Battle of Gettysburg was Michael Shara, the author of The Killer Angels. And the first day he walked me through the battle as he wrote it. Again, not the entire battle, as he wrote it with the characters he followed. The second day, we did the same. And the third day, of course, the first day was principally Buford and the battle at Seminary Ridge. The second day was principally Little Round Top. And the third day was the field of Pickett's Charge. Now, over those 3 days, we walked everywhere that the book deals with, including the Lutheran Theological Seminary. I went up into the cupola. I looked to the west. I could see the view that Buford might have had. And thank goodness it's the area around Gettysburg is not overdeveloped. It doesn't look like it did in the 1860s, don't get me wrong, but it really hasn't been overdeveloped. You don't look out from the cupola and see endless housing projects or data centers. No, it's still rural. So you get a sense of what Buford might have seen. And then when you look the other way towards the town, again, to the credit of Adams County and the town of Gettysburg, there's no high rise. Well, there's one. There's one six-story building built on the campus of Gettysburg College, which is regrettable. I wish they would tear it down. But except for that, no buildings rise up above the cityscape that was there in the 19th century, which makes the town even more attractive to visit as a tourist. And hats off to the people in Gettysburg and Adams County who've kept it that way against the onslaught of development, which, is a curse everywhere. But anyway, we spent those 3 days walking through the battle, seeing it. And that really informed me, not just in terms of the story that Michael Shara was telling, but in terms of being on the ground. And the ground, even though the foliage has changed, trees have grown up where there weren't trees, or trees were taken down where there were trees. The topography of the ground is the same. So no bulldozers have come in since the 1860s and flattened things out. So just south of the town, where the town ends, is the National Military Park. So if you walk Pickett's Charge, the field of Pickett's Charge, and you walk over the undulating field, it's the same as it was in 1863. What does that tell me as a filmmaker? I could see as Kemper's and Pickett's and Armistead's units were moving forward, when they would be partially obscured by the swale of the hills, and when they would come up and be totally vulnerable to the musketry and canister that was being fired at them. And it's a sobering thing to walk across that field, knowing that on July 3rd, 1863, the men were traveling across the same field, facing gunfire and canister fire. It's really more than you could possibly comprehend. What on earth possessed these people to do this on both sides? What kind of ferocity took over these people that they could walk into certain death into this killing field? Well, after these 3 days of being everywhere, being on Little Round Top, it so informed me, so that when I got to the screenplay, it was not simply a matter of interpreting Michael Shara's brilliant novel and his characterizations, which is the heart and soul of it, but also understanding tactically what was going on in the battle and why the commanders made the decisions they made when they did.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, some amazing points there as well. And I have been to Gettysburg myself, and I think it's the sort of place you go there once and it just hooks you, especially if you're invested in the story of that battle, and it's just an amazing place. It really is. So thanks for sharing that. Now, moving forward, obviously, you are going to get the opportunity to make this movie, and you meet somebody along the way which is going to help you to get to that goal, and that is Ted Turner, isn't it? So tell us about Ted and how you become acquainted and how you then pitch him the idea of this movie.
Well, let me say at the outset that I believe that had Ted Turner not greenlit this movie, when he greenlit is the Hollywood term for financing, or when he said it's a go picture. Sorry for me for throwing in Hollywood jargon, but if it were not for Ted Turner, I believe the movie never would have been made, never. And furthermore, that even if this never was at some point, and not never, it wouldn't have been made the way it was made. Because Ted Turner gave me total artistic freedom. Can you think of another studio in 1992? The picture was released in 93, but we made it in 92. Can you think of another studio that would have released a 4-hour and 15-minute movie plus an intermission? Can you think of another studio that would have allowed a script that long to be filmed? The answer is no. No one did. Now, I have to back up to around 1980 and that reading I told you about. One of my friends back then, whom I had met years earlier, was Hal Holbrook. Hal left us, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. Wonderful, dear friend. I met him in '74 when I was working at PBS in New York. one of my first jobs as a producer was to produce the wraparounds, the introductions for the Theater in America series, which I mentioned to you. And so Hal Holbrook was hired as our host. So he hosted, and I wrote and directed and produced his 2 or 3 minute introductions for the ACT, for Cyrano de Bergerac, or for the Trinity production of whatever it was, and we filmed them all at the studio in WNET in New York, and that started a lifelong friendship. He was a sailor back in the day. I was a sailor too. We both had sloops, which we sailed in the Five Sounds. The Five Sounds are south of New England, around Block Island, Martha's Vineyard. And later on, he moved to LA, as I did. And so when I first had a screenplay of The Killer Angels, and he was a fan of the book too, he said he was again a host for a different series. This was 1980, 81. He was hosting a series that Ted Turner was producing at TBS, Turner Broadcasting System. This is the early days of the satellite, the early days of CNN. And Ted Turner had CNN and he had TBS. It's long before TNT, before Turner Network Television didn't exist yet. And so Hal Holbrook was the host of this series, and it was a series called America, about the 50 states that comprise America. When I sent him the screenplay, he said, let me get it to Ted Turner, because Ted Turner is a history buff. He may be interested in getting it produced. He got it to Ted Turner, and I heard back through one of his right-hand people, a gentleman by the name of Robert Wessler, that Ted really liked reading the screenplay, but he was just not in a position to produce it. He was not in a position yet to do drama, only documentaries. So in the intervening, there were then 10 years that went by, 1980 to 1990, when I went everywhere to try to get it financed. I went everywhere twice and was always turned down. And a lot of reasons for that, which we could spend forever talking about. But one of them, if you think back in that time, was the proximity to the Vietnam War. And I think a lot of the studios were not keen on doing war movies. That started to change slowly with Platoon and Apocalypse Now, which were both Vietnam subjects. But another thing at the time, there was most executives, if not all, they didn't think there was an audience for the Civil War. Well, all these things taken together, it just was impossible. I couldn't get any financing. I couldn't get any studio interested in making it. And as I say, a decade went by. I was doing other things. And finally, around 90-ish, in the intervening years, Ted Turner started TNT. His whole empire grew, but I was not in touch with him over those years. And in around 1990, I believe it was, correct me if I'm off a year, Ken Burns did his monumental documentary, The Civil War. Now, before it aired, I think it was the fall of 90, I was invited to the Civil War Roundtable in Manhattan. I lived in New York City at the time. And the guest that evening was going to be this documentary filmmaker none of us had heard of, although he had made documentaries before, to be fair. And he was going to show one episode of his new documentary called The Civil War. So I attended, and he was there, and he spoke about it. And we saw like a 10-minute clip of his new series, and it was the clip about Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. And after his talk, we were introduced, and he said, "Yeah, he said to me, I was inspired to do my documentary from reading Michael Sharra's book when I met this unknown character, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain." And as we know, Ken Burns made Chamberlain the great focus, one of the great focus of his view of the war from the northern side. Well, a few months later, Ken Burns won an award from the Producers Guild of America for the best documentary film. And unlike the Oscars, the Producers Guild announces their winners up front. So he was invited to accept the award in Los Angeles, and he called me and he said, "Ron, I know in advance I'm going to be given this award by Ted Turner." And he said, "Why don't you come and I'll introduce you to Ted Turner." And I said, "Well, Ken, actually, I'd not met him. I'd had a couple of indirect conversations with him 10 years earlier, but I'd never met him." I said, "I'm going to do it." So I flew into Los Angeles expressly for this. Ken Burns was going to receive this award. Ted Turner gave up to give it to him. And before giving it to him, he spent every bit of 10 minutes talking about what a wonderful documentary the Civil War was. And he couldn't understand why Hollywood couldn't understand the Civil War and why Hollywood never did the Civil War. It's not entirely true because in the 1980s, two big miniseries were done, The North and the South and The Blue and the Gray. I'm sure you're aware of that. Mm-hmm. But movies were not done. And now, just before this, and I don't want to gloss over this because it's important, just before Ken's series, a year before, I believe it was 89, and again, people watching this video can correct me if I'm off a year either way. I believe it was 89. Ed Zwick's film Glory was released. So this was the first theatrical film on the Civil War to come out in a very long time. As we know, it's an outstanding movie, deeply moving, so well done at every level, great performances on a very important subject, which was not well known outside of the world of Civil War historians, that you had Black troops fighting in the Federal Army courageously, heroically in, I think it was 1864. In any case, so you had Glory in 89. Now you had Ken Burns' thing in 90. So one could sense a sea change. And after Ted Turner's introduction of Ken, who then accepted the award, I thought to myself, well, I couldn't pitch the Civil War any better than Ted Turner just did. Mm-hmm. And immediately after the ceremony, I went up. Ted said, "This is Ron Maxwell, and he has the Killer Angels, and it's available to do it." And Ted Turner remembered reading it a decade before. He said, "I remember reading that. It's a great screenplay." And he said, "Ron, have your people call my people, and let's do this." Hmm. So at that point, 12 years of knocking around, within 1 week, we put that deal together. I called my colleague, Bob Ramey, Bob Ramey was the head of Avco Embassy Pictures when I had done The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia in 81, 82. And we had a great friendship since. I called him up and I asked him to be my executive producer on Gettysburg. He made the call to Dennis Miller, who was then the head of production at TNT. Obviously, Dennis Miller already got the call from Ted Turner. And in 1 week, we put that deal together. And we set it up initially, Darren, we set it up initially as a miniseries. And I wasn't going to quibble at that point. I conceived of it as a movie. I wrote a screenplay as a movie. I always thought of it on the big screen. But as I say, after 12 years, I was thrilled to have a go project and to finally get it made. And it was put into development as a miniseries. Now, one of the advantages of that is I had a very long screenplay. And so nobody was telling me to cut it. So I had this screenplay, which was 5 hours long, the one I told you about that we read years before with the actors. And nobody said shorten it because we thought of it as a miniseries. And we had a few twists and turns along the way, which I needn't share every last detail with you. But by the spring of 1992, we were in pre-production, and as we know, we filmed it the summer of '92, and we were like, I want to say one week, maximum 2 weeks into filming, somewhere in that time frame, when we got the word from Ted Turner that the specific word I got back, Ted didn't call me, but I got it back through his executives. Ted thought this stuff, the dailies he was seeing were way too good and way too big for television. That's what came back to me. And they wanted to release it as a movie. Well, everybody thought, whoa, now thank goodness when we started filming, when I spoke with the executives at Turner, and I said, look, I think if we want to have any kind of an afterlife for this, like special screenings or whatnot, we should film this in the 1:8:5 format. Now, 1:8:5 isn't CinemaScope. We filmed CinemaScope on Gods and Generals. That's called 2:3:5. The aspect ratio is 2:3:5. That's widescreen. That's like Oppenheim. And that's how we film Gods and Generals. But most of television is shot in an Academy frame. Back in the day, that may be entirely different now, but back in the day, we're talking about 92, which is more like a square because it's destined for the square, the way the TV screens were at the time. Again, they're different now. Everything's changed. But back in the day of broadcast television. But we thought that would be limiting because then it could never have another life. And so let's shoot it in 1:8:5. Now, 1:8:5, I shot, for instance, The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia in 1:8:5, which is a theatrical release format. And so everybody agreed. Thank goodness we did, because had we started filming in Academy frame, we never would have been able to have a theatrical release. And we would have been 2 weeks in. We couldn't reshoot everything. So because we had filmed it in 1:8:5, which is a widescreen format, we knew at that point we could release it as a feature film. Well, nothing else changed, Darren. The budget didn't get bigger. The shooting schedule didn't get bigger. We had 62 days. We kept 62 days. Nothing else changed. So the budget was $15.5 million. I know a lot of people find that hard to believe, but that's the budget. And we finished it on time. We had 62 days scheduled. We finished it on 62 days. We had $15.5 million scheduled, budgeted, and we came in on budget 15.5. And then, but as I say, from that second week of shooting, so far, certainly no further in than that, we all knew, everybody knew we were making a theatrical feature film. Now, I don't know what happened with the deals with the actors and SAG and all that. I just am not aware of that. Even though I was one of the producers, I wasn't doing that stuff. I was concentrating on directing the movie. That was being done by the business side of things was being handled by Mark Dezuma Esparza and Bob Katz, my two co-producers, and by the executive producers Bob Ramey and Mace Neufeld. So we proceeded to make a movie and release a movie. So there's a lot of misinformation because of how this movie began. So I can't stress enough, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity with you, Darren, to set the record straight. It was always conceived as a theatrical feature film, albeit a big, long one. It was momentarily greenlit and started as a miniseries and almost immediately switched back to a movie. And importantly, it was released as a motion picture. It was released in November 1993 as a motion picture. And again, by the time we got ready to release it, Ted Turner was so thrilled with the results that he said, I want to have 70 millimeter prints. Now, again, we filmed it on 1:8:5. So he wanted to create the illusion of even bigger screen, wider screen. Now, of course, this could be done, and we did do it. It costs money. So we had, remember, this is in the days of film. This is before digital. So we had our negative, which is what you have before you make a positive print. We had a negative made for release in 1:8:5, 35 millimeter 1:8:5 release, traditional in theaters. But we had a separate set, I think of like 20 or so prints made in 70 millimeter. And that was billed in the 70 millimeter. It's different projectors. Not every theater's had it. So we had a double theatrical release in the 1:8:5, 35 millimeter regular movie release and 70 millimeter release. Now, because the movie was so long, 4 hours and 15 minutes plus an intermission, so it made it a 4.5 hour experience. That meant one screening a night. So you had a matinee screening and one screening a night. So because of the length of the movie, they only booked initially, like, I'm remembering 200 or maybe 250 screens. It was a limited release. And it was released by New Line Cinema, which Ted Turner acquired. He wanted to be in control of the whole thing. And the big surprise was, no one expected this. When we opened, there's two charts on, if you read the trades of the Hollywood Reporter, Variety. Now there are many more professional trades than there were back those days. But the two numbers they track on a theatrical opening is grosses. What's the gross? Ticket sales. Friday when it opens, Saturday, Sundays, etc. But then there's the per screen average. What is it grossing per screen? In other words, how many seats are being sold? So even though most movies are 2 hours or less, and so they were being maybe 3 times an evening plus a matinee, so 4 showings a day or 5 showings a day, and Gettysburg only had 2 showings a day, we were #1 per screen average. Everybody's head exploded. What was going on? In other words, we were selling more seats once a night than all the other movies were selling all their seats combined. So then New Line Cinema and the Turner Organization had to scramble to get more screens. And they did. I think we doubled our screens. We never went to like 2,000 screens. So you can't do that at the last minute. The theaters are booked. The major studios have their product going through. But we did manage to, I think, almost double it. I think we went, I forget what the total number was and it stayed in the theaters for a while. And so it was a big shocker that there was such a devoted audience for this. And as we know, Darren, it got mostly really good reviews. I mean, if you make a movie, you're always going to have people come after you. And the biggest criticism of the movie is also the most legitimate, I think, the beards. And I remember when we started, before any historical film, anybody who does a historical film, back in the days of celluloid and 35 millimeter, or now in the days of making your movie with your iPhone, digital, some things are the same. And one of the things that doesn't change is hair and makeup. And if you're going to do a period piece, you better have the best hair and makeup team alive, because you could spend all the money in the world, have the greatest acting talent, the greatest script, but if those people aren't top rate, you're undermined, you're flawed. And I remember every movie you have at least a week before you start filming, because you need time to adjust on a historical picture. You have what's called a costume parade and a hair and makeup test. You see what the costumes look like, so you can adjust them, change them, alter them, add to them, make sure they're authentic, make sure they're appropriate to the character. And you have hair and makeup tests. And because almost every character in Gettysburg had face hair, and we didn't have the time for people to grow their own beards. Now, as soon as people were cast, whether they were cast in April or May or June, we said, if they had beards, don't cut them. And if they start growing them, if worse comes to worse, we'll just shave it off. So a few people had a head start, but mostly people didn't. And mostly we had to build all the mustaches and the sideburns and the beards. And it was, we had the photographs of almost every character. We knew exactly what they looked like. And they had these huge, huge beards. Jeb Stuart, Longstreet, and this is not an exaggeration. Well, we had 2 problems. Number one, I was getting pushed back because of the budget from the producers. They didn't want to go after. We knew who the most expensive hair and makeup people were. It's not a mystery. They didn't want to spend the money. They didn't want to spend the money. And I remember having these discussions. No, they wanted, well, one is as good as the next. I said, well, I don't know about that. Anyway, after 12 years, I was in no position to make a big fuss about this. So the hair and makeup crew came on. The second problem was with my dear friend, Tom Berenger. And Tom was a dear friend, is a dear friend. I saw him at the reunion, the 30th reunion 2 years ago. and Tom delivered, as we know. He's the ballast of the movie. His performance in Gettysburg anchors the movie solidly. It's a nuanced performance. It's a solid performance. You're captivated by him. And also, the thing about Tom Berenger is he knows Civil War history far better than I do. I mean, he's an expert. He really loves this stuff. Well, so when I say what I'm about to say, Darren, and I've never said it before, it's not in any way to disparage Tom, but Tom brought his own makeup assistant on the set, his hair guy. And he said, only him is going to do me. Now, as we know, it's no mystery. The worst beard in the film is Longstreet's. No other face hair is nearly as bad as Longstreet's. So the first tests came out. First of all, I saw it. Forget about the screen test. I walked in, I go, well, this is not going to work. And Tom said, well, he had a lot of face hair, and look, here's the photograph. I said, I know what the photograph is, but I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It looks like Halloween. And Tom pushed back. But then finally I said, cut. And so they cut some more and he pushed back. And they cut some more and he pushed back. So then we did a screen test on film. And I looked at it and goes, this is not going to work. And I came back and he kept pushing back. Now, look, if it was me now, years later, having done more movies, I would have pushed back harder. I would have just taken Tom Berenger in the back room and slapped him around. He would have slapped me back. I would have forced the issue. But again, I know I sound like I'm making excuses, and maybe I am, but it was 12 years to get to that point, and I couldn't have a major fight with one of my leads. But I got to the point where he didn't want to hear it anymore. I said, Tom, I just don't believe it. And he said, and he wouldn't do it anymore. He wouldn't cut another hair off that head. And it wasn't just a matter of the volume of the hair. It was how it was done. It was the execution. His makeup artist, and I don't want to mention his name, it's in the credits, his makeup artist was just not up to the task. You can be sure I never made that mistake again. You look at the hair and wigs and hair pieces on Gods and Generals, they're state-of-the-art movie making. We flew in Manlio Rocchetti, one of the best hair people in the world, from Rome to do Robert E. Lee on Gods and Generals. That's how seriously I took it after the mistakes, the knowing mistakes. We went in knowing they didn't work. And I guess it falls on me. I'm the director. So we started filming, and I said, I can't believe this. And even after we started filming, I went to Tom and said, we got to cut more. Now, you couldn't cut a lot at that point. Otherwise, you couldn't have continuity. You couldn't edit it together. But we made a couple of more trims. But it's a shame. It's a shame that a film that works in so many other ways is undermined, because right away, in the first minutes of the film, the audience is compelled to have a suspension of disbelief. They almost like to have to look past the beard and say, okay, I know it's a phony beard, but I'm going to stay with the movie. Oh, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. I wish I would have fought harder. I wish I would have taken Tom into the back room and been more forceful. But there you are. But other than that,
Hmm.
I think we got most everything else right.
Well, I'm going to say, Ron, I'm going to jump to your defense. I never really even noticed the beards being fake. Personally, I didn't. I just thought it was a great movie. I didn't really notice. I'm being completely
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Darren. And as I say, after we started filming, we did make trims. And so it's the first scenes we filmed is where it looks the worst. And then we did a few more trims over a week, and then we got to a point where Tom said, I'm not touching it, and I just couldn't go any further. But I'm not saying, I can understand what you're saying, because if you get involved in the movie and you understand the people in the 19th century had these, enormous face hair, you can maybe see past it.
hmm And again, you assembled this great cast, didn't you? I mean, Martin Sheen and Jeff Daniels, and like you said, Tom. But you do come across Stephen Lang, don't you? And of course, Sam Elliott. So like, Stephen Lang's going to be very integral later on when you get to Gods and Generals, isn't he? But you get guest appearances as well, like Ted Turner, don't you? And also, people might not realise that Ken Burns is actually there, and then you've got Brian Mallon as well. So, what was it like getting these guys together, and did you have an idea of who you wanted to play certain parts before you got into the production side of things?
I love this composite you've put together. I've never seen this before. Bravo, Darren. I mean, this is really, I've
Well,
never.
well, we're gonna thank Wikipedia for that one because they put that together.
Wow, it's
Yeah,
pretty. Well, I've never seen it before, and also the photographs are it's a mixed bag because they've got photographs here of the way people looked in 1992 and others the way they look now. So it's
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of eclectic. But well, uh, I'd met Bobby Duvall sometime in the 80s when I already had a screenplay for Killer Angels. And I forget who introduced me to him. We were both living in Manhattan. But I met him at some point and I got him the screenplay and he loved it. And I said, I'd love you to play Lee. And he said, I'm on board. But the way Hollywood works, there are always exceptions. But generally, the way it works is the agents and the managers don't let you say, I have this actor, uh, because they don't want you to use their talent to raise money. So even though I knew Bobby was interested in playing Lee, I couldn't go around to the studios saying I have Robert Duvall in this movie. It doesn't work that way. And if you do say that, the next minute you're going to get a phone call from his agent at CAA or ICM, and you're going to get, your head handed to you, and your life will be made a misery. So people don't do that generally, and I didn't. But I knew he was interested in the role back in the day, and so when it was a go-ahead picture in 1992, I let him know, and I said, well, come on aboard, and you'll be Lee. And he was already committed. I forget what he was committed to, but he was not available in the time frame. He was committed to doing something else. So we had to embark on that search for who would play Robert E. Lee. At the same time, the head of TNT at the time, his name was Alan Sabinson. He said we need to have names for the four leads: so Lee, Longstreet, Chamberlain, Buford. We need names for those characters, and if we could get the best names we can for the other characters, fine. But we need marquee names for those people. Now, you need marquee names to open a film theatrically. We all know that. Otherwise, people don't know. They are less interested in showing up and buying tickets on a Friday night or a Saturday. But for television, TV miniseries can be promoted in different ways. But back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, they also like to have names. So if you go back and look at the series that were done in the 80s, North and South, Blue and Gray, you'll see they were the big names of the day in those leads. So I understood what they wanted to do. And I've told this story in other places, but I'll tell it briefly again. For the part of Chamberlain, it was these are all challenging roles to cast because they had to look like they were people that were there in America in the 1860s. For instance, you couldn't cast a Chinese American, obviously, and they depending on the role, had to bring a certain gravitas, and the actor has it or doesn't have it. To take a ludicrous example, you're not going to cast Pee Wee Herman to play Robert E. Lee. All right, that's a ludicrous example. But the actor you have to look for would be capable of the gravitas of the real person they were portraying, and then it becomes a challenge of acting. So eventually, Martin Sheen's name came up for Robert E. Lee, and as we know, we cast Martin. Uh, I was suggested an actor who had just come over from Australia, who had never done any work in the United States, but somebody said, you should see this guy. He's interesting for the role. Somebody who knew me and knew the project. So I went and I called this actor, and I was very impressed with his reading. I said, but they want names, so we're gonna have to do a screen test. So we did a screen test with him in a blue uniform, and he learned a couple of Chamberlain's speeches. I did the screen test. I came in, I showed the executive, and he said, I told you we want a name, we can't use him. And I said, but this guy is so good. We're never going to find anybody as good. And he just refused to hear him. And anyway, that actor was Russell Crowe. So Russell Crowe, as we know, went on to do other things shortly thereafter. But I was compelled to keep looking because the studio wanted name actors. And along this journey, Jeff Daniels' name came up. And we cast him. And as we know, Jeff Daniels delivered one of the great performances of his career. Forgive me for saying it. I think it's one of the great performances of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's right up there with Gary Cooper as Sergeant York.
And I think when you put a photograph of him looking like Chamberlain with the real Chamberlain, they look alike.
They do, yeah. And then we cast Sam Elliott as Buford, and Tom Berenger as Longstreet. So we had our marquee cast, and then we continued with, as you know, we cast Stephen Lang as Pickett, my old friend Richard Jordan as Armistead. I wrote the part for him. So there are scenes with Armistead that are not even in the book. For instance, the scene when Armistead is with Fremantle before Pickett's charge, and he says, "This guy is who this guy is," and that was all a new scene that I wrote expressly for the part of Armistead for Richard Jordan. And as you say, Cooper Huckabee as Harrison the Spy, Morgan Shepherd as Trimble. He has basically one scene, but it's memorable. I threw down my sword right there in front of him.
I love that. I love that.
And Jeb Stewart only has one scene, but they're all memorable. Even if
you've got iconic scenes that even when I'm having conversations with my Civil War friends, I told you there's no time for that. It's like they're iconic bits of the script, that you're never going to forget.
Yeah, I see the photo that Wikipedia has here for James Lancaster is not correct. That is not James Lancaster.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We'll have to get back to Wikipedia and fix that.
Yeah.
But and then Patrick Gorman as Hood. Many of his lines are oft repeated in the Gettysburg world.
100%, and they're just so great. I'll just want to go around the rat. I love that.
Should have gone around the
Yeah,
rat.
they're fantastic. Honestly, you created something so amazing. It's just so great, and long lasting. But yeah, again, so let's talk about the battle scenes because, and of course, descending on Gettysburg itself. What was that like descending on Gettysburg for that summer? The actual place where this huge, battle took place.
Well, during the 80s, part of the challenge I had when I would try to pitch the project and people would see the screenplay, very few executives read screenplays. That's my experience. They're busy people. They got to handle a ton of work, and they're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars. So they farm it out to script readers. So the script reader back in the day would get paid $100 to read a script and write a report or whatever they were paid. And so you're having your film script judged by faceless script readers. You don't even know who did it. And that's what the executive sees. And so part of what the reports, and I got to see some of them, even though the filmmakers generally don't see these, the reports back goes is unproducible. As written, this script is unproducible, which means back in the day, $100 million. Now, I knew better because I've always thought and operated and functioned as an independent filmmaker. I don't make movies retail. I've never thought that way. But I soon saw there was a double problem here. One problem, Darren, related to what we spoke to earlier, the perception among film executives back in the day that there was no audience for this. That perception persisted until Glory at Wick's film. And even though Glory did well and was well received, it wasn't like a box office sensation. So there was this perception, and that's what we call in the industry the upside potential. No one could see the upside potential. Even if we make this, who will come? The other problem I had, as I just alluded to, was it was perceived, they would read these readers' reports, and the readers' reports would say unproducible, $100 million plus to create this battle the way it's written on the page. And that is called the downside risk. So between the downside risk being perceived as off the charts and the upside potential as being perceived as zero, I couldn't get it made for a decade, more than a decade. Now, the upside potential, that's you're dealing with a crystal ball. All you can do is say, well, there is an audience, but you can't convince somebody of that if they don't have it in their head. Now, the one who felt differently about that was Ted Turner, which is why he was the first and only guy who finally made Gettysburg, because he could see the upside potential. He could see the audience. But Ted Turner this is just one more example of the fact that he is a visionary. He sees what other people don't see. His whole life, every project he's touched, that's his great gift. What could I address over that decade? What I could address was the downside risk. So I had to demonstrate through factual work that this movie didn't need to cost $100 million. It didn't need to cost $50 million, as we know, Darren. When we finally made it, it was made for $15.5 million. Okay, that's the proof. But I had to overcome these wildly inaccurate projections that these faceless people were making. So I couldn't just ignore it. So in the decade of the 80s, I thought, well, yes, to try to make this in the United States, thousands of costumes and bayonets and muskets and cannons and sets, it would be very expensive. So I looked to Eastern Europe. Now, remember, I mentioned earlier when I did Verna USO Girl in West Germany in 1977, but the Cold War. It didn't change until the fall of communism in 1989. So before 1989, east of East Germany were all captive nations by the Soviet Union. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, etc. And I had no illusions about what was going on behind the Iron Curtain, except it was a place where European filmmakers went when they needed big armies. So when Dino De Laurentiis was involved in his movie Napoleon, they filmed it in Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union, with the participation of the Red Army. So it was possible in those days, in the 80s, if you needed big war scenes, like Sergei Bondarchuk, the great Russian filmmaker, made in War and Peace, you might be able to make a deal with the Red Army, such as it was in Poland or Hungary. So I actually went, a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money to Hungary, to Poland, to see what could be done in terms of working with their armies and then film it in Poland. Can you imagine? That's how desperate I was to make this producible. So in 88 and 89, I was in Eastern Europe and I was crunching the numbers to try to deal with this. And I believe it was in 88 that I took a flight from Budapest to Berlin, which is, so in those days you had to fly from Budapest to East Berlin, got off the plane, went right into a bus, and went through Checkpoint Charlie, which is barbed wire, German Shepherds, AK-47s, the whole 9 yards. I'm glad I got to go through that because people forget the world was divided in those days between a totalitarian, horrific regime and the free world. I'm glad I had that experience, and I would not never have had it had I not been trying to put this consider making Gettysburg in Poland. Well, as we know, the following year, the wall came down. East Germany was liberated. The communist empire dissolved. But another thing was happening simultaneously to all this. In the United States, there was a movement called the reenactor movement, where Americans took it up as a hobby to portray Yankee or Confederate soldiers. And they were not even doing this in the abstract. So each reenactor would assume the role, in some cases, of their own ancestor, if they knew it, if they had done that research, or if not their own ancestor, of someone from where they lived. So they weren't there as a Confederate or as a Yankee. They were there as a particular person that they found from the archives or from the records, which makes them all living historians. Now, I know some people look at these people and say, well, it's a weird hobby or they're strange people. Well, I don't know about weird and strange. This is what I can say. They're your neighbors. They live everywhere. They're from every community in America, North and South. They're from all professions. They're blue collar. They're white collar. Some have PhDs in history. Some are car mechanics. It's a cross section of humanity, and a lot of the women involved are wives, sweethearts, sisters, daughters. They're involved too, and they do the civilian reenactors. Now, there are people who do reenactment, as you well know, Darren, in your country, who do the English Civil War, you name it, all
Yeah,
aspects of
well, I've
it.
done them both. I've done the English Civil Wars, and I will just say quickly, the Southern Skirmish Association, which is the British American Civil War, they've been reenacting since 1968. But because of the movie Gettysburg and Ken Burns, you had a real, surgence of uptake.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand, and we had when we did Gettysburg, we had a contingent from Britain and from Ireland. We had
Mhm.
British and Irish reenactors, and both the Confederate and Yankee. So anyway, this was all happening, and this movement was happening. And by 1988, there were now tens of thousands of Civil War reenactors. Now, again, we have reenactors who do World War I and the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, but the great bulk of reenacting is the Civil War. So in 1988, I went to the 125th anniversary reenactment at Gettysburg, which was stunning. And in fact, I didn't know it at the time, but I found out that part of that reenactment that's where the crew from Glory, they filmed part of that reenactment for some of their big scenes in the Battle of Antietam, which start the movie, the first scenes in the movie. They took advantage of those thousands of reenactors who were there. But in '88, I realized that we could make the movie in America because of the reenactors. And I shifted everything around to thinking of it in terms of making it in there, and then also in terms of making it at Gettysburg, uh, not somewhere else, making it right at Gettysburg. So I worked with the people that I met who were organizers in various reenactments, and then we applied for and I conceived the movie as filming it at Gettysburg and right around the Gettysburg battlefield. And at that time, so before we even had it set up at TNT, I knew I wanted to make it at Gettysburg. So by the time I had studied it, and that was my production plan, and I did all that work, and that was what I was trying to pitch at that point, even before we set it up with Ted Turner. My plan by then was to film it in America, to film it at Gettysburg with reenactors, and with crunching the numbers, making budgets accordingly. So by the time we made the deal with TNT, I was determined to make it at Gettysburg, and then some of the production executives pushed back because Pennsylvania is not a right to work state. And so it's controlled by all the unions. And I'm not against unions. I belong to the Directors Guild of America, the Writers Guild of America. I work with SAG. I've worked with Teamsters. But sometimes there are places where you can make a movie less expensively. Uh, and they're called, what's in America, right to work states. So people were suggesting I film it in Louisiana or I film it in Georgia. And I was pushing back. I was saying, no, I've done all the studies. The topography of Gettysburg is unique. There's no place like it in America. We can bring the crew there. We don't have to move. The crew goes in one hotels. The cast goes in one hotels. We never move again. We stay there. And finally, it wasn't easy, but my argument prevailed. And it was agreed to film it at Gettysburg. And at that point, we needed to get permission from the national park. And the first answer from the National Park Service was no way. And then we went back again, and the second answer was hell no way. And so, but I was persistent, as we know, after 12 years. I'm a Capricorn. And I went to a meeting that was attended by the Park Service and some of the Park Service people. And a couple of the Park Service people get up there and they strenuously argued against permission to have us film on the battlefield. And they said it would interfere with tourism. It was dangerous. We trashed the battlefield. I mean, we wouldn't respect the history. Just everything they could think of, they threw at us. And I made the argument, Darren, I said, look, this battlefield belongs to the American people.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't belong to the Park Service, although I respect the fact that the Park Service are its custodians, and I respect every single Park Service ranger that's working here. You're doing God's work as far as I'm concerned. But it doesn't belong to the people who are wearing the Smokey the Bear hats, the park rangers, any more than it belongs to the people wearing the baseball caps, the filmmakers. It belongs to the American people. And the story of Gettysburg belongs to the American people. And the movie we want to make belongs to the American people. So let's work together. We're not working at odds here. We have the same mission statement. We want to protect this battlefield. We want to bring attention to this battlefield. We want to help this battlefield live for future generations and tell its story. So let's work together. And that argument seemed to prevail because we finally got permission. Now, some things were going on behind the scenes, let me hasten to add, because Ted Turner was already well known and already a man of influence. And I think some phone calls were made to the Secretary of the Interior, which controls the United States Park Service. And anyway, that's where the decision had to be made. It had to be made at the highest levels. And so the word came back from the Secretary of the Interior and through the National Park Service that, yes, we were going to get permission to film. Now, we had some rules to abide by, and they were perfectly understandable, and we abided by them. No opposing fire within the same shot. In other words, in the same shot, we couldn't see anybody shooting at each other. You could shoot this way, or you could shoot that way, but you couldn't do this because they thought it would be too dangerous. Mm-hmm. Now, we're using blanks, but they're real muskets, real bayonets, so that was an understandable concern. They didn't want to have that level of danger within the National Military Park. We said, no problem. We will abide by that rule. Second rule, we're not going to obstruct visitation. Fine. So wherever we filmed, we put up yellow tape, like at a police investigation, in such a way that it didn't interfere with the roads. Well, we didn't want to film on the roads anyway. That was not an issue. And there are paved roads, as you know, all through the battlefield that tourists can drive on. And then we had it cordoned off where we were filming so that people could sit and watch us from a distance, but we didn't interfere with the flow of tourism. We were very good about abiding by that. So our own camera equipment, our trucks, we never obstructed that. And of course, we couldn't move anything like a statue or a monument. Of course, we never thought of doing that. And anything we damaged, we had to pay for it. Well, of course, we didn't damage anything. And of course, we kept the place clean. We didn't leave a paper cup. And when we started filming, it is perhaps this is not amazing, perhaps it is. We filmed 62 days. And I'd say 60%, I'd have to go look at the schedule. 60% of the 62 days was within the national park, within the national military park on the battlefield. The other 40% was filmed outside in private property. Wherever we had to do this kind of fighting, hand-to-hand fighting with bayonets, where you saw the people shooting at each other in the same frame, the things we couldn't do in the park, that's off the park. That's on private property. But the field of Pickett's Charge, for instance, that's right on the field of Pickett's Charge. Now, when we get up to the angle, now we had to recreate in private property. We had to build the stone wall, the angle. That's when you see the melee at the angle. That we didn't do there. But the whole charge from the tree line all across the field, right up to the Emmitsburg Road, that's on the actual field of Gettysburg. And in all the filming we did, there were tourists there all the time. We were there in July and August. Not once did we have to redo a take because a tourist talked too loud, hit a car horn. No. Those thousands of tourists were quiet and respectful to the work we were doing. It's a testament to the people who visit the battlefield. And we didn't lose a take. Think of that. We didn't have to do anything twice because a visitor made a noise that would have interfered with it. They were just engrossed in what they were seeing. They came up to visit the Gettysburg battlefield and they saw these, Martin Sheen or Tom Berenger. They saw these actors bringing it to life. About 2 weeks into the filming, Darren, one of the park rangers who was most adamant about wanting us to film there walked up to me on the set, put out her hand and said, "Mr. Maxwell, let me shake your hand. I was wrong not wanting you people to be here. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm proud of what you're doing." And I thought to myself, Darren, now that's a victory, winning someone over.
Yes.
And we filmed. It was I think a happy experience for all. And so that was the summer of '92. The summer of '93. Well, two things happened. The film came out in November '93, as we know. So it was the year post-production. So we finished in the fall of '92. We worked all through the next year. It was a big post-production, as you can imagine. The film came out the fall of '93. So the summer of '94, two things happened. The movie aired on TNT as a miniseries. So the same movie wasn't recut. It was broadcast on TNT. And that's why many people who didn't see it until then think it was released as a miniseries. No, this was 2 years after we filmed it and almost a year after it was released theatrically. It had its premiere on television, TNT. And at that television premiere, it broke all records for any miniseries that had ever been done to that date, the audience for it. And that summer, the summer of '94, the visitors who visited the Gettysburg battlefield doubled from the previous year, and to this day has never gone back to its previous numbers.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Ron, again, without reenactors, It probably couldn't have been possible, could it? Because the thing is, what they bring is they bring all the equipment, and also, I mean, I know some reenactors that are proper, everything's got the stitch, the button, the everything's got to be correct, So again, without these guys, you probably couldn't have done it, could you?
No way, no way. And again, it's not just the fact that they come uh, with the correct uniforms and the weapons. In the case of the cavalry, they come with their own horses. In the case of the artillery guys, their own cannon. All that would have been, yeah. In that sense, those faceless people that I had to endure over the previous decade were not off the mark. It would have been unproducible without them in the United States.
Hmm.
They brought more than that, because what they also brought was themselves. What do I mean by that? No matter where you put the camera, you were looking at people that were living in the 1860s. Now, you know this if you do reenacting.
Yes, 100%.
People are stepping into a time warp. They want to be in that time warp.
Yeah,
That's
so
one of the reasons they do it. They want to escape.
you put that uniform on and you become somebody from the 1860s. That's it. That's the mindset. Yeah.
And the best example of what I'm talking about was a scene in the movie. It's one of everybody's favorite scenes. It's 32 years now. So people. One of most people's favorite scenes is when Lee rides out before Pickett's charge.
Oh wow, yeah.
And the troops start yelling, "Lee, Lee, Lee." Now, I've told this story before, but I'm happy to share with your audience. That scene was not scripted. It was not in the script. It was not in the movie. We were prepping that day for when the troops come out of the tree line. It was very hot, very humid. We had 2 ambulances on the set all the time so that we could immediately stabilize anybody that collapsed from exhaustion. Because that's a serious thing. I mean, heat exhaustion or sunstroke can kill you. It's not a joke. So we had 2 ambulances. You have to stabilize a person if it happens, where they are, get them in an ambulance and get them to where they can recover. And if you can do that, it's okay. But you got to be ready for it. So we were ready for it. And luckily, we didn't lose anybody on the movie. No one was seriously injured on this movie, not a person or a horse. Because we started every morning, Darren, every morning with our crew chiefs and our assistant directing staff, everybody's visual effects, props, 3 words: safety, safety, safety. No excuses. No shot, no scene, no movie is worth anybody's life, including horses. And that was, and because we had that attitude and we enforced it, we didn't lose anybody and we didn't lose a horse, thank God. I'm very proud of that, because this was a dangerous set with thousands of real muskets, thousands of real bayonets, and hundreds of real cannons. Just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on this particular day, it was hot and humid, and I thought, let's just do a favor for the reenactors. And I got back to Marty Schoen he had a day off, and I asked the ADs, asked me if it was just as a treat, the reenactors suit up, put the hair and makeup on, right as Lee, just to give them a boost, because these reenactors weren't paid; they're all volunteering.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the Pickett's Charge week. We had 5,500 for 6 days, so everybody had booked their vacation time. It was a big set. And Marty, as we all know, as the world knows, is a great guy. And Marty could have said, "I'm not going through this 2 hours in hair and makeup and spirit gum." No, he said, "I'll be there." And sometime that afternoon, we were prepping one of the shots when they come out of the tree line, and he rode out. And the second he rode out, there was this, what we call, I'm a child of the 60s. We had a term in the 60s called a happening. And this extraordinary thing happened. We were back in 1863. And I told Case, the cameraman, I said, roll, tail sticks, before you do a shot, you do this. But we couldn't do that. We didn't even have a scene number. It was not in the script. We'll do tail sticks. In other words, we'll sink it at the end, roll. And right away, the ADs had to go out, collect the paper cups, the Gatorade, they're scrambling. We filmed. Well, remember, this is the days of film. It's not digital. So you have even if the camera magazine is full of film, 10 minutes, you're out of film. Well, we filmed for 10 minutes, the film ran out. And Case was doing out of film. So we finally got on the bullhorn in the 80s, cut, 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 cut. And I said, okay, I got the first AD and cameraman together and Marty. And I said, change of schedule. Whatever we had for the rest of the afternoon, we're moving it to the next day. This is a new scene, give it a new scene number. We're going to now cover what we just filmed. And we spent the next couple of hours going in, we set up a dolly track, and we covered the scene we had just captured. And that became one of the most powerful scenes in the movie. Now, my point, Darren, is that never would have happened with professional extras, never would have happened with an army in Poland. That could only happen with reenactors. And I think those reenactors in those scenes deserve a special Academy Award for best performance from an army in the history of motion pictures.
100%. Amen to that. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And do you know what? So going back to, so my favorite scene, I love that scene, but the scene that really gives me goosebumps is the minute that the bayonets all go on and they start the march across that field and the music strikes. Now, every movie has to have a good soundtrack, and Gettysburg delivered. Do you agree?
Oh yeah. Now, excuse me from moving my
That's okay.
camera
You
at
go
my,
for it. Yeah.
but I'm going to talk while I'm moving through my premises because I just got the signal that my battery is running out, and I started out with a full battery, but who
That's all
knows?
right.
Anyway,
Take your time, mate. Take your time.
bear with me. I don't want to interrupt because if I interrupt, then you're going to have to edit, and I don't want to put you through that ordeal. So basically, yeah. Well, music, music, music. This is a huge subject. One of my favorite parts of movie making is working with composers. Whole thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the script, as we discussed. I love working with actors. I even like working with production executives. Would you believe? And uh, and certainly one of my favorite parts is working with composers. So when I work with composers, I like to bring them on the project as soon as possible, so they have time to think about themes, think about the sounds, and bring them into the project so they don't just get it at the last minute. Now, the way movies work, most of the time, um, composers come in at the very, very last minute on a project, and they're jamming to do the score at the last minute. Bear with me. I'm almost done here.
You're okay, mate. You're fine.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, okay, I'm back. I
Thank you.
won't, my power won't run out. So most of the time, they're given very little time to write a score. So I like to give them a head start, so at least they can think of themes and so forth. Now, another thing all filmmakers are confronted with is to what extent do you use music on a motion picture? Music is so powerful that you can inadvertently bury the text, bury the emotion, or it's redundant. You have a certain emotion, and the music is just redundant. In other words, any motion picture has a certain fragility, which is built around the text and the performances. So any filmmaker has to be really judicious in the use of music. And what we've seen in the last couple of decades is the extraordinary innovation of music. Sometimes you can't even tell it's there. So it's not melody, it's not harmony, it's soundscapes. It's suggestions, it's sounds, it's moods. And occasionally, like older movies, let's say of another era, melody is used. Now, in my view, the music should derive from the people, the characters. Otherwise, it can feel imposed. And also, the music should bring something which we can call the subtext. What are you not hearing in dialogue? What are you not seeing? And that's where the music has a role to play in terms of a subtext. But it's easy to overdo it. And now in the three Civil War movies I've made, I could have opted for soundscapes. That's certainly a legitimate option. And other filmmakers might have taken the same three scripts and not used melody and harmony the way I did in my movies. But I felt that these people in the three movies living in the middle of the 19th century were in a world of melody, were in a world of harmony. And so I thought it belongs to the people. So I opted for composers who could work in that idiom, melody and harmony. And then the question became, what melodies? So in my discussion with Randy Edelman, Randy had already done a lot of movies, as we know, including Last of the Mohegans. It was, okay, the soundscape, such as it is, and the use of melody and harmony must derive from the experience of these people. So what were they listening to? They were listening to traditional music, fiddles, banjos, that kind of thing, which was originally from the British Isles and Ireland, folk music. That was one source. Another source were hymns. They were all going to church, with a rare exception. All these characters grew up in various denominations of the Christian church. So they grew up hearing hymns. And to a lesser extent, if they lived in cities, they heard symphony orchestras playing the classical composers of the day. So they will have heard Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart. So this is the realm. And so the chord structure for Randy Edelman, if you listen to it, and if you're a musician or you know church music, the chord structure is similar to what you'll hear in hymns. Same thing John Frizzell did in Gods and Generals. And the same thing Laurent, the composer on Copperhead, did in Copperhead. So they all started from the same, we had similar discussions. The music has to belong to the people. Which is why, when you hear the score to Gettysburg, subconsciously, you're in church.
Mm-hmm.
It hits those chords. And it says that you are entering a world beyond time. Now, I'm so glad we got to this, Darren, because this is the heart of the matter. And this is the way I approached all three movies, but especially Gettysburg and Gods and Generals, because they're in the cauldron of the conflict. And I thought of these stories being in two parallel universes all the time, every shot, every moment, every scene. One universe is 1863 in this place with these people, anchored. And the other realm is the timeless realm, which is the realm which doesn't change, so that people watching this movie in Greece or in Peru know absolutely nothing about the American Civil War, emotionally understand it, because the other parallel universe is fratricide. And that everybody understands. And the opposite of fratricide, as the French say, l'envers du médaille, a medal has a shiny side and a dark side. L'envers du médaille, the opposite of fratricide, is brotherly love. So I kept this in mind all the time. So while you see the ferocity on the battlefield, killing, hand to hand, point blank, at the end of a bayonet, you also see this deep brotherly love as personified in the case of Gettysburg between Hancock and Armistead, which is why one of the scenes is not in the book. Another one of my scenes is with Hancock and Chamberlain when they're musing about how ironic that Armistead and Hancock would find themselves on opposite sides of this momentous battle. So these kind of conversations become very important with the composers, because the composers then are dealing, have to understand this. You're making a film which is about Battle of Gettysburg, but it also is timeless and elemental and classic, and is going to be seen in a larger context, in a Homeric context. Now, this is not an abstraction. I don't mean this to sound grand. I'm aware it could sound grand, but it's because this is our heritage. We all grow up knowing the stories of Odysseus and Iliad. And this American Civil War is the American Iliad. And that's how we approach the telling of the stories. And that's why they're the size they are. Gods and Generals is also 5 hours. They're both 5 hours long, because it's not a snapshot. You have to feel that you're going into this world, and you have to give yourself time as the audience to do a total immersion into this world. And you realize that when you're in this specific world of in the case of Gods and Generals, 1861 to 1863, in the case of Gettysburg, 1863, you're also in a timeless place. And this is why the music is so important, because the music subconsciously tells you this. And that's why we needed an orchestra, a big orchestra with a big string section, because these things subliminally take you beyond the time and place into the soulful story that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that has been on my iPod, or it was on CD when I first got the soundtrack. And I actually had the pleasure of, and it's really strange because we got in the car. So we went to Gettysburg, me and my friend, in 2007. We was driving down the Emmitsburg Road, and the last song of the movie came on just as we were driving out of Gettysburg. And we hadn't planned it that way. It's where it had left off before we'd left. Oh man, goosebumps. Can you imagine that? Oh,
Well, thanks for sharing that. It's, I mean,
wow.
everyone who visits the battlefield uh, comes away with an experience like yours, Darren.
Yeah,
Different variations on it, but at some moments, they cease being tourists. They cease being gawkers. They cease being people just read the plaques, and they make an emotional connection. It's
yeah.
quite extreme.
Yeah, I've made a lot of emotional connections with Gettysburg, but again, through this movie, again, again, the reason I went to Gettysburg is because of this movie. Now, my origin story of this movie is, just quickly, I'll go over it quickly, is I was an English Civil War reenactor, started in 2003, and in 2004, my friend came with this cardboard box of VHS videos, and inside this box was Waterloo, Cromwell, and the two VHS videos of Gettysburg. And I put them on the shelf. And one night I came home from work. I was like, "Do you know what? I'm going to watch the first one." No, I ended up watching the second one as well because it was that good. And from that moment on, I was like, I need to go to Gettysburg now. And that's what happened. I went to Gettysburg because of this movie. It's so last reach. And of course, my interest in the American Civil War comes about. And then eventually I stopped reenacting the English Civil Wars and will join the 4th US Infantry here in the UK and become an American Civil War reenactor. And I haven't looked back. So, just want to thank you for such a fantastic movie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's been out there for 32 years, and I've come to realize now that it'll probably be around
Oh,
long
it's long
after
lasting.
I'm
Yeah.
done. and it's been embraced. It's part of the cinematic pantheon of our cinematic history. It's on all the lists of war movies. It's humbling. I'm grateful for it. And we got lucky. What can I say?